Hi everybody. So I am. Oh, we're gonna turn this off. Hi everybody. Welcome to, I think it's our third or fourth HEMA AMA. It is been an interesting week. I was lucky enough to take a few days and be in Poughkeepsie meeting with my teacher. Gave me a really great opportunity to do a lot of practice, learn some new things, and also I actually was able to take some of your questions to Tristan and do a little video in which he responds to a few things. Peter, when are you gonna start doing this topless? I'm wearing I'm trying, Lean. I'm trying. Let's see. All right. So anyway, so the first thing is, like I said, I have a little. One of the things that we've been talking a lot about, or that has come up in the past couple weeks, is I had mentioned a few weeks ago, especially in these times where we're doing a lot of solo practice, we are wanting to focus on like a intentional or mindful practice, and it's kind of become a little bit of a buzzword in a few of the HEMA groups now, which has been kind of cool that it was us who started it. Yeah. So what I was able to do is I was able to talk to my teacher Tristan, who was able to give I think a really, really insightful glimpse into what it means to practice mindfully. So we have a little pre-recorded interview that I will play for you, along with another video that I found. It's actually a TED Talk from their animated series that talks about how to practice better from kind of a scientific view, and why does practice work. It's only a couple minutes. The TED Talk one, the interview with Tristan, is much longer. But I want to start off by kind of saying hi, and just wanted to do a quick check-in with everyone. And I know there's already a couple questions popping up. Let's see. Hello, meow, 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 meow. Peter, when are you going to start doing this topless? Sure, next week. If I do one on Friday, it'll be the HEMA After Dark edition. How does that sound? Let's see what we got going on here. Heidi wants to know what the J in Peter J. Haas stands for. The J is for Jacob. It is my grandfather's first name. He always said Jacob. He was a German man. So yeah, that's Peter Jacob Haas. I only have the three names. I don't have any additional religious names or anything as such. We did not do that in our in my weird Lutheran upbringing. Let's see. All right. So I just wanted to take a few seconds and kind of check in. How's everyone doing regarding training? How you doing with the quarantine? Do you have any initial questions before we kind of dive in to the mindfulness interview? And also, can everyone hear me okay? I'm always concerned about audio. I'm going to continue drinking my coffee, as is tradition. One of the things that I've had a lot of fun doing is I've been, in addition to extra training, I've been, you could have been Wolfgang though. Yes, there was a coin toss actually to determine my name. It was either going to be Peter or Wolfgang, and they did a coin toss, and it ended up being Peter. My loss, really. I mean, Wolfgang should just really be my stage name, I guess, from now on. Okay, cool. Cool. All right. So if there's nothing else, I know everyone wants my name and social security number, but if there's no other questions, I'm going to prep the video watch party, or the interview. Let me just prepare. Okay. All right. I think that worked. Um, Trying to work on some mindful cuts, figuring out some katas is the next step, I guess. Yes, regarding longsword kata work, that is definitely something that uh, I will hop on, and I promise you, for next Tuesday, I will have some longsword kata for you. Um, okay, so that being said, I'm going to uh, move over to the interview, which I know you're all really excited for, and I know I am too. I am going to also on the Discord. Can I stream the audio on the Discord? I'll see what I can do. Anyway, all right. I am going to, without further ado, let us hop into the interview. I'm here at the Squinting Rabbit Studios to talk with Tristan Zukowski, my teacher, and we wanted to have a little discussion about mindfulness and practice, and wanted to kind of wanted to begin with your thoughts on the definition of mindfulness and what does that mean to practice mindfully.
Well, that's a lot to unpack right at the beginning. Why don't you tell me first, because I've just become aware of this phrase being used a lot more frequently recently. So this is something that you're bringing from your own set of students to me. So give me a little bit more context of like how this question's been posed by other people so far.
Sure. So this is something that kind of came up organically a couple weeks ago when we were doing an online session, and I think a lot of the root of the question or the root of the phrase, the mindful practice, came from a discussion mostly about how do I practice at home? How can I practice in a solo environment without having, say, a teacher or a more advanced student there to help correct me. And it kind of came out, the way I kind of proposed the idea of mindful practice was the idea of when you are electing to practice, say, a technique or, say, like Oberhau, or making sure that you're taking that moment to say, I am now going to practice Oberhau, and not kind of mindlessly just kind of, I'm going to just do this action that feels like Oberhau.
Sure.
But to kind of break down that action and kind of self-regulate, or at least I don't want to say judge, but self-critique yourself more. And thinking about, say, okay, this is Oberhau, but what are the points of the Oberhau? What are the different steps of the Oberhau? Am I meeting the criteria of what a good Oberhau is?
Sure. Okay. All right. So that gives me some initial ideas of how to break this down. I think where you're starting the answer off with, choose a thing, even if it's Oberhau. Oberhau might in fact be very difficult to practice, especially in like small New York City apartments. Maybe Unterhau, we'll say Unterhau. That takes up a little less ceiling clearance, right? But whatever it is, I think it's important, as you said, to choose a thing. And I want to kind of extend this idea even more. I just want to stretch that idea out a little bit. So, before I get too deep into my answer, I want to go back a little bit and discuss an often asked question, because I think it's very relevant here, even more so now that many people are without teachers, unless they're breaking quarantine, which I don't recommend. And that question is, how do I practice in the absence of a teacher extension? Is it better to practice knowing that I'll probably do things incorrectly, or only practice under the watchful eye of the teacher. And there's a lot of different schools of thought on this, and I've always been one to say it's okay to practice. The training hall, the dojo, the fencing saal, that's the place where the teacher can kind of rein things in, critique, refine, etc. But I think it's okay to get past that barrier, maybe mental barrier, of avoiding practice out of fear of making mistakes. It's okay to make mistakes. With that being said, everyone knows something. If they've been to one class, two classes, several classes, hopefully everyone has picked up little tidbits of information. They might be misremembered, misinterpreted, but somebody has, everyone has some little segments to work with, right? Back when I was teaching beginner classes regularly, I used to actually break down, kind of give a recap. Like, look, if you can only remember this one or these two things, that's fine. Practice this, right? I'm not going to get into specifics, but what I mean is, whatever you feel remotely confident that you know, or at least remember from class, remember getting from a teacher, practice that. Practice only that for a long time. If it's Oberhau, let's, you brought that up before, so let's just talk about Oberhau. There's a lot to unpack, even with the most basic bread and butter Oberhau. Even if it's just the same side, a diagonal strike from your dominant side, let's say, even within that action is so complex, even as a fundamental technique, right? That there are so many things that you can do to disassemble it and start working on the little pieces. Again, I'm not going to give a huge kind of litany and a huge laundry list, but it can be something as simple as moving the body, moving the core in coordination with the sword, or if you don't have a sword, just in coordination with your hands. It can be if you're working on a footwork exercise, it could be the coordination of when you take that step, when the foot actually lands, and then you engage the core. It can be as simple as when you take the step, how deep is the step, how wide is the step, how what angle your feet are in relation to one another and to the target beyond you. If you're stepping like inwards like this, are you stepping more linearly? All these little things can be focused on and practiced in and of themselves. And I think that's the key idea behind mindful practice, is everything needs to be broken down. Even Oberhau, break it down to the most fundamental aspects that you can think of and just work on those. I'm not saying just forget about everything else, but if you're just worrying about your footfall, let's say, it's okay to not be so picky about what the sword is doing, your edge alignment, your angle, etc., because you can only focus on so many things at once. And this is another issue with mindful practice, is knowing that there's only so much you can do. Right? Just focus on feet and that repetition over and over and over and over and over again, many, 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 many times. And then move on to something else. That's kind of the next phase, but not soon. I think this is an inherent problem, is everyone wants to rush through everything, their entire experience learning, right? It's like, oh yeah, as long as I put my foot forward, I swing down from this side, that's Oberhau. Okay, good, done. Let's go on to, something else, different strike. That's super, super, super superficial. It's super basic, and it doesn't really benefit anyone, anything, just to kind of sign off as like, okay, I met the the kind of checklist requirements. Okay, I stepped, with my right foot. I swung diagonally downwards from my right side. I ended in some kind of downward position, whatever. Okay, check. See what more you can add to it, bit by bit. And again, I'm not going to give a huge litany of examples, but already in there's things that people can work on. Just footfall. My head's exploding with ideas because I want to give a laundry list because that's very much what I do in these sorts of situations. But it can even be what part of the foot touches the ground. Are you stepping with your heel? Are you stepping with the pad of your feet? Is your back foot rocking up? Are you just ending up on your toes? Is it turning out weirdly? All these things have to be paid attention to, not all at once. Again, this is part of mindful practice. But, distill everything down and just focus on that. And then when that becomes, a little bit more, you don't have to, fixate on every single thing. You're confident that that's in there. Move on to the next thing, period. But it's going to take millions of repetitions, and that attention to detail.
That actually brings me to another question, which is when... and I know it's going to be, it's a little abstract and different for everyone, but the idea of how far should a student feel comfortable kind of pushing what they know versus what they don't know? So, for instance, you're talking about, say, Oberhau, right?
Sure.
But there's a lot of, like you said, a lot of things to unpack, a lot of different little things to work on. When is it a better idea for a student to say, hey, you know what? I love the idea of practicing X, but I can do this half of it, and I'm really worried that I don't know enough of the next part.
Without specific example, that's tricky. I'm tempted to say don't worry about it, but this is also the part of me that is the Japanese Budo practitioner side of me is don't worry about it because there's a reason, and you don't need to know the reason yet. So it's less important to play all the kind of mind games of, oh, what if they do this? Oh, what if they do that? Oh, what if this happens? And you get into this kind of pattern where you're spending so much time about hypotheticals that you're not even practicing the default version of it. So part of me wants to just say, don't worry about pushing the envelope, that that bridge will be crossed later on, or that can be explored in other ways, like in sparring, in kind of free play, where you might have these variables, these hypotheticals all of a sudden manifest, and then you can get some new data, and then you actually have some kernel of evidence that you can use to inform practice later on, rather than just, oh, what if they do this? What if you do that? Oh, that person did that, and it's because of this, perhaps, or it's because they're really tall, or because they moved off this way. You can start to build that into a greater repertoire of variety of the same technique, right? Like, again, to come back to Oberhau, even the same bread and butter default Oberhau, it has to come in different flavors. If the person's higher, you're trying to hit a taller target, you have to reach out a little bit sooner, a little bit taller. If you're fighting somebody a little bit shorter, or you're aiming for a lower target, like the base of the rib cage or the thigh, you have to still reach out, but you have to aim slightly differently. These are all different flavors, but until you have the ability to do default version over and over again, thousands of times, in the moment of truth, you're not going to be able to execute all those different flavors nearly as well as people assume they will when the time comes, right? So again, to kind of re-answer, the quick version is, especially without, either an instructor present or others to work with to kind of workshop things, just focus on the fundamentals, focus on the default, what I say, the kind of the textbook, the effect book, canonical versions of the techniques. I think that's more beneficial.
And in terms of we've talked a little bit about like the physical part, like that, like do XYZ the way it's been prescribed.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any comments on like the psychological or emotional part of, say, mindful practice? Because I know a big thing, and this is actually something I get dinged on all the time at the dojo, because sensei will be like, hey, you're drifting into that, like I can see it in your eyes, you're doing kesa, oberhau, but you're doing it, you're just doing the action, you're not thinking about it, you're not feeling the action.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's difficult. I think, I don't want to assume, but I think that one of the reasons for, kind of checking out the boredom, which, when you're doing things over and over again, 1,000 times, or I'm being a little bit generous, 1,000 times, but let's say you're practicing, a particular cut 100 times. That is a very small number of repetitions for a particular cut to, practice, but it's better than zero, for sure. If you are just focused on, execute program oberhau over and over again 100 times, you're going to be bored by, 7 or 8, and you check out, right? But when you're more cognizant of all the details, all the minutiae that go into that, like some of the things I was mentioning before, where your feet are, how they're moving, if they're moving, what your core is doing, angle, your particular angle that you're doing, all these other things, it gives you more to think about, in the sense of, it gives you more specific things to focus on, I suppose that's the better way of saying it. And at least for me, I'm less likely to kind of, fade away and just, do it mindlessly, because I do have this specific thing to think about, even if it's not, for 100 of them, the first, set of 20, I'm going to think just about this, and the second set of 20, I'm going to think just about that. But I'm still just doing 100 oberhau, but the focus, the individual focus can change, and that keeps it a little bit fresher in the mind, maybe. We were talking about this before when we were cutting outside. Everyone, especially for like the mental tricks, the psychological tricks, everyone has, or I should say, everyone has to find their own way of thinking about things and compensating for things, because everyone's brains are so vastly different. So how you target mentally, that's going to change from person to person. How you're thinking about achieving the relationship between what you're doing and the target. You have to find your own way of kind of tricking yourself into doing these things. I say trick, but it's not really a trick. It is an acquired skill, I think, and it has to be practiced. Just like anything else, just like practicing the oberhau, you have to practice, or practicing, I think is a better way of saying it. And that's specifically how to disassemble things into their component parts to focus on these more specifics and get that oberhau better in specific ways, and intentfully, intentionally, basically, rather than just, it's okay, it's Tuesday, I'm going to do 100 oberhau, and maybe accidentally the overhaul gets better just from repetition. That's possible, right? It is possible to do. I think it's a more random path to travel, and not one to rely on necessarily.
There's a really good saying that's been I've picked up along the way. It's practice does not make perfect. It's perfect practice makes perfect.
Yeah. And yeah, again, to reiterate the initial thought of this sub question, right, is learning how to practice is a skill that needs to be practiced. I assume it's in frame,
Mm-hmm.
but I have a very unique prop, and I had a point to make with it, because this has come up a few times in the past few days. People have been asking me about practice methodology, about something as basic as, somebody was asking me, how do you do this specific thing that I'd posted? How do you do this so well? And I have to admit that I have a little bit of an advantage. I don't think it's unique, but how I've applied it, I think, may in fact be. Let me get this out of the way, right? So prior to being a swordsman, a sword instructor, my kind of previous, much earlier career path had been as a classical violinist. I was a concert violinist from the age of 3, and my practice and performance kind of tapered off when I was 18-ish, more or less. So 15 years of training with a teacher, and of course, practice and orchestra and chamber ensembles and solo recitals and stuff like that. 15 years of classical violin training. What's the connection? The connection is exactly what I mentioned before, right? It's a kind of feedback loop of learning from an instructor how to teach oneself, right? And it's a difficult process, but it accelerates as you get more comfortable with the idea of disassembling everything, right? If we can make some metaphors here, it's kind of ridiculous, but practicing your scales and arpeggios, that's kind of like doing warm up cuts, suburi, at the beginning of class, it's like, okay, this is da 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 over and over again. And it's very easy to do mindlessly, right? But what does that benefit me? I'm just going, okay, fine, whatever. But there's always something that you can add to that practice. Again, I'm not going to give specific examples, but there's always something that you can tweak to present yourself with a new challenge, right? And it's hard. Like I said, it gets easier, but it's always hard, and I think that's the point, is that kind of inoculates a person to the I'm going to say this in a slightly different way, because I know what I want to say, and this is, I think, definitely an issue with HEMA teachers, HEMA authorities, I'll say, not even teachers, but just authorities, right, is a lot of times there's a bit of too much investment of ego, which makes it very, very difficult, if not impossible, to reanalyze yourself, right? Kind of analyze everything that you've been doing, for better or for worse, deconstruct it, mix it around, try new things. Maybe those new things don't work. Maybe they work even better than you expected, right? But you have to have the willingness to accept the fact that you're not perfect. You'll never be perfect. That's a journey that never reaches its destination. And the best anyone can hope for is a more or less gradual path closer to perfection. And that's definitely something that I picked up, even though I don't perform anymore. It's been more than 15 years since those 15 years that I'd been a violinist, right? But those lessons, not necessarily physically, but those mental lessons have stuck with me. And I bring this to the forefront because I know, and I've spoke with many other HEMAists that have similar backgrounds. There's plenty of HEMAists that are musicians, that are artists of other forms, painters, calligraphers, sculptors, even digital artists. Like, all the kind of arts community has to have some sort of both anal retention, and with that the struggle towards self-improvement. And I think that's at least making the connection, like whatever it is that you did in a previous life, or you continue to do, that you consider you do pretty well. See what you can learn from that, from the process of learning the thing that you do well. Medical doctors. We have a few people both in the the Budo community, our circles of the Budo community and the HEMA community, who are doctors, right? That's an intense line of study. It's based on minutia. It's based on understanding how things work in a almost intuitive level. Bring that to martial arts, right? It's the same thing, and it's almost a cliche that it's popped up in movies like what is it, Hero with Jet Li, right? Where they're making the connection between calligraphy and swordsmanship. Yeah, it's a martial arts cliche, but it's absolutely true. All that attention to detail, all that fine motor coordination, it's learned no differently than you learn how to use a sword, or a cabinet maker uses his chisels and saws, all the tools of anyone's trade. That path to understanding them in an instinctive way, that's the same path that we should be on sword. And it baffles me when I see folks in the community that have maybe both that kind of positive attitude towards one aspect of their life, in terms of, this, that passion, that knowledge set, that skill set, but when it comes to sword, it's like, oh yeah, okay, I can do the overhand, it's good enough, right? It's just so strange that you wouldn't make that same connection with a different art, even if it is just a hobby. I talk a lot about the remembering the gravitas of the sword. The violin is a thing of beauty. It's designed for beauty. Sword may be a thing of beauty, but it's designed to end other people's lives. It's a very different tool for very different reasons, but it's still a tool. It's still designed with purpose, and it's still meant to be used with skill, with intent, etc. Basically,
Yeah.
I mean, those are the main two things. So, even if, as I said, earlier on, even if you just know one thing, you took one class right before the quarantine hit, and you just remember that one thing that teacher said, just practice that. And just see where you can go with it. See how you can make that one thing that you practice as perfect as possible for today, and then tomorrow see if you can make it even more perfect. Again, we're getting into kind of cliche realm, but this is exactly what people need to do with sword, as with anything they expect to get out.
One thing that I think is very difficult for people is to shift gears. do you have any like beginner advice in the concept of like letting go / becoming more like moving towards being more mindful?
Just doing it, I think, and understand that. Oh, we're gonna we'll make it meta because we made it meta before, right? So we just talked about you have to learn. You have to learn how to learn, right? Understanding how to practice is an acquired skill, which means you have to practice practicing. Sure. And mindfulness, likewise. It's not just going to be like oh all of a sudden I've reached nirvana
Galaxy brain,
right, the eureka moment. It's not going to happen, so don't expect it to, but it will come in small increments, but you have to understand that, just like anything else, it's imperfect. So it's okay to have these very natural lapses in attention, and that too is okay. You get over yourself, realize you made a mistake. Don't sweat it. Don't be like, oh shit, I'm never gonna be mindful because I can't even count to 10 or 20 cuts without falling asleep. That's okay. Whatever. Get to 5. Next day, try to get to 10. Right? It's always going to be a learning process. Push yourself to borderline uncomfortable limits, because that's what that's when you get these eureka moments. That's when you get these thresholds that you kind of crash through in terms of progress. Again, the idea here is. It could very well be this idea of disassembly that's uncomfortable. It could be the idea of, practicing in an unfamiliar environment. Like, who wants to practice in an apartment? The ceiling's right here. Find a way to do it. It's gonna be uncomfortable. It's gonna be weird. But hopefully, if you do it mindfully and not just, okay, well, I guess I'm gonna do this because this is the only thing I can do in this 4 feet by 6 feet area, hopefully you'll come out the other end better off for it. And if nothing else, like I said, if all you can do is unterhau gyakukesa a few hundred times a day in that small space that you have, oh man, when this quarantine's over, you're gonna have the best unterhau the world has ever seen.
Actually, before we go, this is especially for Liliana, who had sent me a question the other day when I mentioned we would be talking. She saw your video and your post about cutting and not. I can look up the question real quick.
Okay, sure.
Just because I want to make sure that I'm communicating the correct question.
Okay,
sure. But it had to do with the idea of cutting while not cutting.
Oh, okay, yeah, so this was just a few days ago, right?
Correct.
Okay.
I think this literally just came in the other day.
Yep, okay.
Let me just pop onto the longsword forum.
So I know what post she's probably referring to, and if you haven't seen it on my Instagram, 2-3 days ago I posted something. The food for thought idea was that to cut and to not cut, or I think I phrased it, cutting and not cutting are one and the same. The general idea is that the control necessary to do either of those things stems from the same body mechanical skill set, and also from the same the intention. The intention has to be there to do the thing that you intend to do, which is redundant, right? You have to intend to do a thing, and then you have to have the physical ability to achieve that thing, right? That was my point, right? So, if I want to, cut through air or cut through resistant material or partially cut for whatever reason, as the situation dictates, whether perhaps demonstrating something with an assistant instructor, I'm like, oh, you just cut like this. but I don't actually want to like hit him with the blunt sword, or if I have the sharp sword, obviously I don't want to like put that into him, right? Or if you're sparring, this gets into the idea of not needing to put 1,000% of your power behind the strike, because I just need to do the one thing that I can do with a blunt sword against padding or the fencing mask, which is just touch, right? I don't need to swing for the hills, right? Or slam the tent stakes into the ground, right? That kind of action. Or just in practice, the fencing hall safety, right? If you're practicing something and somebody is supposed to zig and they zag instead, so all of a sudden, I got to put the brakes on. It's all the same mechanic, right? So again, the intent, the mental ability to make these decisions, and the physicality necessary to actually execute that intention, to manifest that intention, are the same. And the post was actually more specifically on the physicality, when I talk about things like grip mechanics, when I talk about grip angle, when I talk about using the entirety of the body, the connection with the ground, whether or not you're stepping, it doesn't actually matter, but just the awareness of all that working together as a mechanical system. It's all the same thing. It's not a different skill set to cut through tatami or cut through a water bottle or cut through people than it is to do some kind of like light tippy-tappy fencing, or no touch fencing, right? For whatever reason, the kind of low gear sparring has become a thing, and that's gone off a weird tangent where people aren't actually fencing with intent, because they can't, because to do so would mean that they end up necessarily injuring themselves, right? But that's kind of tangential to the actual post. The post itself was cutting and not cutting are one and the same. So I assume you've brought up Liliana's question. We can address that.
It was literally, will Tristan elaborate more on cutting and not cutting?
Perfect. I pre-answered it. Yeah.
Yay. So yeah, that's perfect. There's actually two other questions that popped in.
Okay.
We'll make it quick.
Mm-hmm.
The first is from Hildo.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, Hildo. What is Tristan's thinking about distance and footwork, especially offline or circular footwork?
Right. Yeah, I remember. I was supposed to think about this, and it's difficult. I think distance and footwork. No, I almost said I'm gonna take a step back there, which is somewhat intentional pun. But no. Footwork and how it relates to sword technique. I think these are where we see a lot of specific differences style to style. It's, to be perfectly honest, not something I've thought about very much. Mostly because I've just usually kind of dismissed footwork, except for the mechanics of it. Like I kind of mentioned before, it's like I'm gonna step here, I'm gonna step here, I'm gonna turn my foot here, I'm gonna do blah 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 blah. Like the actual doing of the footwork, I think, is more important. And once you have that ability, just like cutting and not cutting, right? If I want to put my foot here, I want to put my foot here. And in doing so, I want to land on this portion of my foot. I want to make sure that my balance is here, or maybe forward weighted, or maybe back weighted, or whatever. But having both the intent to do a specific action with your feet, and the capability to do it, again, the intent and the manifestation, the execution of that, is more important than... Again, this is to me, right? So this will probably cause some flame wars, right? I think that is more important than obsessing over the complexities and the hypotheticals of feet. what I mean by that is, especially in like later systems, like Spanish rapier, for example, where you get all these like complex footwork diagrams, and I know other people have even made up their own footwork diagrams, and that's all well and good. I'm not kind of poo-pooing the kind of historical science, the geometry of stepping and how that relates to strike optimization and stuff like that. But I think that thinking about it too soon is less beneficial than having the ability to just get your feet where you want them to. Because again, when it boils down to it, if you want to do this thing, your carefully laid plan, and the situation dictates that you can't do that anymore, God help you if you can't snap out of that paradigm and do something else, or do the thing that actually needs to be done in that moment. This is, kind of the bigger connection to be made here is, where we see a lot of double kills. I'm just gonna make the comparison between, tournament fencing and a lot of double kills, and I think that's because it's a battle of wills, and in not the good way. That is to say, people are paying too much attention to the fantasy of their technique. By that I mean, I'm going to do this thing, and they're going to respond in such and such a way, and I'm just going to execute program, let's say, Zorn or Wind to Ox, right? What happens if, there's like one tiny little grain of sand in the circuitry just throws everything into a tailspin, right? If they back up like 2 inches, like there's no point in even pursuing them, or it just kind of completely collapses the framework of that decision tree, and all of a sudden you have two choices. Either you have to change immediately and do something that you hadn't actually planned on doing, or, which very likely I see this a lot of times, is they just continue doing the thing that they started doing. And when two people are overly fixated on the thing that they intend to do, that's where you get a lot of double kills, because they're not either willing or capable of both to instantly adapting to the situation. And yes, I mean, we're going to start flame wars here, because there's some lines of reasoning that say the decision trees, the effect book, or if they do this, if they do this, if they go right, if they go left, if they wind high, if they wind low, whatever, gives you these sort of frameworks to make the decisions. But I think that's still a little bit too cart in front of the horse, in the sense that if you're already playing out this decision tree, it might be too late. I don't want to go too far down into that rabbit hole, because that's a very complicated thing. But it boils down to psychology, I think, more.
Well, the kind of like maybe bridge two ideas that you kind of talked about today is, if in terms of, like, say, like Hilda brought up footwork, right?
Yeah.
Earlier you said if your teacher says to do this way, do it that way.
Sure.
So in case of, he's saying like early proto rapier kind of stuff. If the text says to exercise this version of the rapier Zorn, then do it that way.
Yeah.
But don't become fixated on it in a way that is unhealthy.
Yeah. There's, oh man, I mean, hopefully there's someone out there who, has studied, neurology, psychology. I don't even know, like, this is how little I know about these fields, is I don't even know what the proper term for these kind of processing or processes are. I'm sure there's a discipline out there that's exactly what I'm referring to, but it relates to things like the OODA loop, the decision-making process. It relates to, skill acquisition, all this kind of stuff. But the I'm just gonna say, focus on the fundamentals. I think, even if you're practicing a certain kind of, let's say, circular footwork, practice the circular footwork. One of two things will happen. Either, the technique will work because the technique works, or you'll get so good at doing that even if it shouldn't work, it's still so spectacularly good, surprising, stable, for example, like even if that shouldn't work, like it's so like keyed in that the other person can't possibly counter it in any meaningful way, because you're just that good at doing this one particular thing. I think that's more valuable than just going around the spider web of footwork patterns, or thinking, again, this gets into that kind of like the hypotheticals, like if you're so keyed into this technique needing this particular response, you're already worried about something that hasn't happened yet, and that's an easy way to get into your own brain. This is really, again, it's a vague answer. It's a good question. I don't want to say it's a bad question. It's a vague answer just because my focus for so many years have been motion, doing motions effectively, and worrying less about I keep saying the hypotheticals, but waiting for the perfect storm for this, to work. I think what's more important, like, if you love this particular footwork, just like if you love this particular technique, this is another thing to practice. Harder to practice when you don't have somebody to practice with or practice on. But I think the more important thing becomes, how do you create the environment to do the technique that you want to do, right? If you want to do this, I don't know any of the side sword or rapier terms, but this one particular thing, because it looks cool, it looks cool in the manuscript, it sounds cool, like, it's just, I want to do that. Okay, learn how to do that. Again, practice, on your own, perfect the physicality of it. But that's only, even if you can do it perfectly on your own, that's 50%, right? Then the battle becomes, the real challenge now is set the other person up so that all you have to do, you don't have to think about it, right? It's just like, I'm gonna create this context in the other person to do, there it is, with my beautiful circle step or compass step or whatever, or straight down, it doesn't matter at that point, because at the end of the day, you chose it. You chose the technique. You chose the time and the place to do the technique. You've practiced it. You set the trap up, for the other person, and they went face first into it. That's those sorts of things. That's what I find fascinating in a general sense, right? So, again, I don't obsess so much about footwork, cause, especially since I tend to be a little bit more linear in general. But I think for anyone who wants to optimize it, eventually, after you can do it better than you could, yesterday, today you do it better than yesterday, tomorrow you do it better than today, etc., etc., etc. Once you're ready, now, again, the work begins all over again to force it to work, right? So, if you want to apply that to footwork in conjunction with, any particular technique that's appropriate to that, absolutely do that. But, again, I think that's the challenge is setting the other person up equally for their failure and your success. how you do that, again, if you're looking at a system I'm not familiar with, that'll be on you and your own research. But the manuals probably have some clues, some keys to the equation. But again, just to reiterate a point I keep making over and over again, don't rely on the technique to work accidentally or just because. I mean, I kind of said this before. It's like, oh, even if you're really, really good at it, it might accidentally work. At the end of the day, you need to create the perfect storm for the technique to work. I'm going all over the place.
Mindful application.
It's the corona.
Yeah.
It's getting in my brain here.
Sam asks, are we actually reaching some understanding of a system of armed combat that is workable, or are we just whacking it to the Zettel? Intellectually whacking, of course. I should add, I'm at least partially serious about this, irrelevance notwithstanding.
I mean, it's framed in a weird way, for sure, but it's a valid question, and unfortunately it's not one we really have good answers to. We have some assumptions about the creation of the Zettel, the Fechtbücher, in terms of who they were for, the audience, and the implication for the art based on who these books may have been for. And some of the research presented seems to indicate that this was directed towards, young, wealthy burghers who, not unlike HEMAists today, want to have a good time fencing in the fencing saw and go home at the end of the day having not killed anybody, and maybe have a few drinks with everyone afterwards. I think that and this has given me a little bit more peace of mind, especially teaching Lichtenauer longsword. It's a lot more familiar perhaps than some of us assumed earlier. That is to say, maybe Lichtenauer's art and all those Fechtbücher that follow this was not some secret, Holy Roman Empire or ninja assassin style combat that was, exclusively for duels to the death or for battlefield application or all this kind of gruesome stuff. At the end of the day, these were probably just a bunch of people fencing and having a good time, which is why. I mean, I'm not going to get into some of the Corey Winslow is probably a better one to kind of pick apart some of the words, but when you see occasional things like Ernst, that are just kind of tossed in there, it's like, oh, if you actually get into some shit in a back alley, do this.
Right.
But you only see that sprinkled in sometimes. It's kind of like in a self-defense class. It's like, look, if you actually get into okay, we're gonna learn arm bar and toss the person or all these other cool techniques, but listen, if somebody pulls a knife on you, fucking run, right? That's the technique, right? That's the kind of wink wink nudge nudge. Is everything else is there's a little bit of fantasy element to it. But if you really need to, this is your option, right? And I think potentially we can make that kind of analog with the fencing manuals. Maybe there's a drunk guy, and maybe you have to just stop a fight, or maybe you have to because so many people have knives or swords. Maybe you have to take the sword in not a friendly situation. Here's the thing to do. Here's a very, very direct, simple thing to do. Well, but for the most part, we're just going to ting, ting, ting,
right.
ting. Again, not unlike what we do today. And I think that's something that again, we can kind of take some comfort in. We can find some familiarity with. I don't think it excuses being too casual about stuff. That's going like too far to that extreme, because again, swords were designed to do damage. The sportive aspect, whether it's sportive in the 14th century, whether it's sportive in the 16th or the 17th, or early 20th century. All this kind of sword fighting sportiveness. After it wasn't really necessary, with very few exceptions in the modern era. We can just do it to enjoy it. But again, I would caution anyone against forgetting where it came from. I think that's the most valuable thing to kind of take from this question and respond to it that way. So.
Great. All right. Well, those are all the questions I have for you from students, and I think you've covered the subject and actually brought in the subject of mindful training into all the questions presented. So this is really great. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, definitely.
I think it's time to re-up the Coronas.
All right.
So what we're going to do is we're going to cut back to the live show part of this, Ask Me Anything. So sorry, future Peter, it's your problem now.
Hooray!
All right. Well, I hope that video was helpful for folks. I just want to bring up a subject that actually came up in the chat log. Leanne had talked a little bit about the suck, and I think it's something that a lot of people had this, oh yeah, me too, response to. So I just wanted to kind of give my little input for what it's worth. There really are kind of like 4 ways that you can kind of approach the suck. I think, or like when you're training, by the suck, I mean when you're training and all of a sudden, whatever it is that you're practicing, it's just actually that the practice time isn't getting better. The actions aren't getting better. It's actually getting worse. I personally experience this a lot during cutting. And like sometimes it'll happen to me during simple cuts. I'll do Oberhau. It'll start great, and then as the day goes on, it gets worse and worse. There's 4 different things that can kind of happen, right? We can either let it get to us, and let it get us upset, and then it'll start to, and that only makes everything worse, right? It makes everything kind of, the shit flows downhill. Like all of a sudden, get upset, cutting gets worse, and then negative feedback loop. We can ignore it, which I think is a very common thing, and just pretend. We can tell people, oh, I'm fine, and just try to keep, and then we just kind of keep working. And when we ignore the suck and don't acknowledge that something is giving us a challenge, it's actually robbing us of that experience that Tristan was talking about, like setting up a challenge for something to overcome. Is also probably, again, going to create a negative feedback loop, right? So we don't really want to get upset or ignore it. For me, what has always seemed to be the most functional thing to do, and it's not easy, but we acknowledge the suck, right? Step 1 is acknowledge the suck. Always make sure that we say, okay, something is really difficult, something is getting worse, something is going on here. And there's that term like embrace the suck. And what that means for me is not like, oh, I'll put my head down, I'm going through it. Acknowledge, for me, embrace the suck means I am acknowledging that there's an issue with the thing that I'm working on. And then that's when I start going back to that checklist of like, okay, wait, what was the thing that I was working on just now? Let me go back and do it very slowly, very methodically, and then try to find that piece that maybe that I was messing up. Sometimes when I'm doing draw cuts, it's just like, oh wow, I can just feel, it's just, I'm hearing way too much saya. Oh, did I check my sayabiki? Did I check my koyochi? And then all of a sudden I'll find like, oh, you know what? I wasn't doing enough sayabiki, or I wasn't moving the scabbard far enough back away from the messer when I was doing the draw cut. So kind of, embracing the suck. Oh, hello traffic. Embracing the suck for me a lot of the times is like taking that moment, taking a deep breath and resetting mentally, and then kind of going through that checklist and reminding myself that like I'm here for a reason. And the last thing you can do is kind of acknowledge this, that something is not going correctly, and during that bit, just saying, all right, I need to take a break, because usually I'll have at this point already attempted to embrace it, and it's not helping. So then I think it's something that we probably, I know I'm super guilty of this, not taking enough breaks during training, or at the very least not acknowledging the fact, you know what, I need to take an extra break right now because I'm afraid of feeling weak, or feeling like I'm not dedicated enough or something. But yeah, so that's been my approach, and I'm interested to hear from other folks too, especially those who have a large background in practice, be it musical or graphic design, or as Tristan said, like medical profession that involves like intense study, etc. I'm interested to see and hear how you practice things. It's something I'm still working through, and as part of being a teacher, I want to learn how to teach folks to teach themselves better. That being said, I do want to open up the floor again to some questions real quick, just for a little bit. And then what I would like to do is show you an insightful TED Talk video. It's like this little 4-minute video that is just kind of explains the science, the neurological science behind practice, but also some tips for how to practice more mindfully. And then after that, I'd like to do we'll just do a quick check-in and call it a day. So I'm gonna pop over to the chat groups over here. This is a way bigger discussion than can happen here in the live chat. Oh yeah, no, I completely agree. I think this would actually be a really fun group class to do. Actually, like some type of chat, like actual video chat thing. I mean, preferably we'll all be in the same place again soon. Fingers crossed. Which reminds me, as a complete side note, I will be doing, hopefully, I'll be working out the details with Rob for being able to set up doing some longsword online classes, not just through the standard the ones that are available through the Sword Class on NYC online portal, but also some streaming classes where I'll be able to look at you and you'll be like, what will be like a conferencing type class. So we're still working out the details on that, but I'll post about that as time goes on. So maybe that's something we can do. I'd love if either of you could host a session. Yeah, I think this is definitely something that we can investigate more, and maybe we can try to. I think it would also be really great because mindful practice is not just about like like a HEMA thing or just a Budo thing. It's like it's so inclusive of so many different things, and I think a lot of folks are in some ways taught some of these tools without knowing that it's mindful practice. But it would be interesting. I can try to find some other disciplines that might be able to feed in, and we can do like a pan training kind of seminar or something at some point. I think would be great. That being said, let me queue up the video here. Doesn't look like there's too many more questions. There's a lot more in the Discord chat. There's a lot of talk about footwork, and that that would be a really, really interesting class to do. I'd love to get into that. Leanne brings up a really good point. Mindful practice involves believing that the practice will work, and sometimes that is hard. Yes. Just yes. Something that actually is in the complete interview, the interview with Tristan and I, actually there's about 20 more minutes of that, give or take, that I'll release at another time on the YouTube. But one of the things I brought up is that there is an important element of all creative endeavors, be it sword arts or really anything is like an imagination, right? An imagination of a better future. Um, and when I say that, I mean in such a way that like we can imagine ourselves being a better sword person. Like we can imagine ourselves practicing a better version of Kunstfechtens than we are at now. Tristan talked about that ego death, having to like let go of what we think we know a little bit, and like letting go of our ego and re-examining ourselves. And part of that, for me at least, is having that that more positive, that positive vision of the future, and and not just worrying about maintaining the thing that we're currently operating in, even though sometimes like you're at a certain level or at a certain place and you are kind of vibrating there and it feels like, oh, this is the most I'll ever know, or this is the best I'll ever be. And so you get really like tense and scared of losing that place. And so instead of trying to imagine a better place, a better position of being in, it's all about maintenance. And I don't think that only maintenance without hope of progress or a vision of a better place to be is going to do anyone any good. It also, and this is the hardest part for me, is having patience with myself when you wander. Yeah, Katie, that's a really good point. I think we are always hardest on ourselves. For most humans are the hardest on themselves, and I think that's part of the reason why we do have like the fencing schools, is because we're all here to help each other. And I think that especially in our school, we have a really good environment that helps each other out the best we can. And I know we're all, especially once we're all back together again, I look forward to that group help, especially now in the solo practice. It can feel kind of isolating and not having that support. And that being said, I am not working right now, so I do have a medium amount of time compared to my usual tight schedule. So if people are interested in like little classes or like little powwows, or even if someone just needs like a one-on-one chat or something, just message me either on the Facebook or Discord or email, or a lot of you have my phone number. Feel free to use it. I'm always reachable, and I always want to be here to encourage and lend an ear to anyone who might need some encouragement in a moment. So that being said, let's take just a couple minutes and let's watch this video. I got something out of it. I hope you will too. So give me one little second here as I cue this up. 3, 2, 1.
Mastering any physical skill, be it performing a pirouette, playing an instrument, or throwing a baseball, takes practice. Practice is the repetition of an action with the goal of improvement, and it helps us perform with more ease, speed, and confidence. So what does practice do in our brains to make us better at things? Our brains have two kinds of neural tissue, gray matter and white matter. The gray matter processes information in the brain, directing signals and sensory stimuli to nerve cells, while white matter is mostly made up of fatty tissue and nerve fibers. In order for our bodies to move, information needs to travel from the brain's gray matter down the spinal cord through a chain of nerve fibers called axons to our muscles. So how does practice or repetition affect the inner workings of our brains? The axons that exist in the white matter are wrapped with a fatty substance called myelin, and it's this myelin covering, or sheath, that seems to change with practice. Myelin is similar to insulation on electrical cables. It prevents energy loss from electrical signals that the brain uses, moving them more efficiently along neural pathways. Some recent studies in mice suggest that the repetition of a physical motion increases the layers of myelin sheath that insulates the axons. And the more layers, the greater the insulation around the axon chains, forming a sort of superhighway for information connecting your brain to your muscles. So while many athletes and performers attribute their successes to muscle memory, muscles themselves don't really have memory. Rather, it may be the myelination of neural pathways that give these athletes and performers their edge with faster and more efficient neural pathways. There are many theories that attempt to quantify the number of hours, days, and even years of practice that it takes to master a skill. While we don't yet have a magic number, we do know that mastery isn't simply about the amount of hours of practice. It's also the quality and effectiveness of that practice. Effective practice is consistent, intensely focused, and targets content or weaknesses that lie at the edge of one's current abilities. So if effective practice is the key, how can we get the most out of our practice time? Try these tips. Focus on the task at hand. Minimize potential distractions by turning off the computer or TV and putting your cell phone on airplane mode. In one study, researchers observed 260 students studying. On average, those students were able to stay on task for only 6 minutes at a time. Laptops, smartphones, and particularly Facebook were the root of most distractions. Start out slowly or in slow motion. Coordination is built with repetitions, whether correct or incorrect. If you gradually increase the speed of the quality repetitions, you have a better chance of doing them correctly. Next, frequent repetitions with allotted breaks are common practice habits of elite performers. Studies have shown that many top athletes, musicians, and dancers spend 50 to 60 hours per week on activities related to their craft. Many divide their time used for effective practice into multiple daily practice sessions of limited duration. And finally, practice in your brain in vivid detail. It's a bit surprising, but a number of studies suggest that once a physical motion has been established, it can be reinforced just by imagining it. In one study, 144 basketball players were divided into two groups. Group A physically practiced one-handed free throws, while Group B only mentally practiced them. When they were tested at the end of the 2-week experiment, the intermediate and experienced players in both groups had improved by nearly the same amount. As scientists get closer to unraveling the secrets of our brains, our understanding of effective practice will only improve. In the meantime, effective practice is the best way we have of pushing our individual limits, achieving new heights, and maximizing our potential.
All right. Well, I hope you found that video interesting, or at the very least entertaining. I personally got a lot out of that video, and I got so much out of my conversation with Tristan, and I really hope. I know that this format of this week has been a little unorthodox, but I hope that it was helpful. Yeah. So what I'm looking forward to, well, hopefully be back in the dojo soon. But I am going to continue doing these Tuesday night sessions here on the YouTube with the Discord and the YouTube, etc., etc. I'm working on some solutions so we can try to push it out to all the social media, but I'm still learning all the streaming things. What I would like to hear from folks is a couple different things. I want to hear what are you working on? What would you like to mindfully practice? And I would love to kind of I'd be more than happy to work with folks one-on-one, or folks have if groups of people are working on the same thing, we can set up some more of these type of sessions. But let me know what you're working on, and I'm more than happy to help in any way that you that I can, any way that I can. And second of all, I would love to hear a little more about how you would like these to progress. They're not always going to be lecture based. I'm hoping to maybe start doing some kind of class work, or so it's not just me talking at y'all all the time. But I'd like to hear a little bit about some things, some topics even that you'd like me to discuss, and maybe some things we can demonstrate. That being said, it's just about 8:30, so I want to make sure to give you your full hour and a half. I am yours for the next 4 minutes. So hit me up with any quick questions you might have on Discord or the live stream here, or the YouTube, and I will do my best to answer it. I have been thinking, since a lot of folks have brought up the idea of footwork, maybe footwork is a good one to do, or maybe even like Tristan said, there are so many things to break down. I thought it might also be fun at some point to do a group reading of the Zettel. If people are interested and would like to participate, what I thought might be fun is to let me know if this is something you'd want to do, but to assign different folks different parts of the gloss to read, and then cutting them together as like the super cut of our school reading, the Udalev effect book. I just think it would be kind of fun. It might be an entertaining project to kind of something to do, but also like it'd be a fun way to kind of experience the effect book together. I know a lot of book groups are reading. There's one book group that is reading Moby Dick together online. So this is not anywhere near that size of a tome, but I think that would be really fun. So message me if you are interested in this, and then maybe in a couple of days I can put together a list and start assigning things. Then we can do a group recording somehow. Maybe we can add some music and something, or I don't know. It'll be I love little projects like that. I see some people. I already see some people are in. So, but yes. So message me either on the Facebook or Discord, and we'll start setting this up. That's exciting. Again, let me know what topics you're interested in for these groups, these kind of group sessions. As I said before, I'm working out getting at least access for myself and maybe one or two other people that are local to access the Sword space in order to do kind of online class type things. That kind of, again, depends on how things play out in New York over the next couple of days or weeks or such. But definitely I want to make sure I'm bringing you material. Let's see. So let me know topics, questions you have. I'm probably going to be Poughkeepsie again in a week or two. So let me know if you want me to bug Tristan about some stuff. The answer to that should always yes. We should harass Tristan. Again, I know things, and Sam, was it Sam or someone mentioned earlier that things are really stressful right now. Things are really difficult for our friends and our family and ourselves as a city, and the entire country, and frankly the world is going through a time. Again, I want to emphasize just how proud I am of our HEMA community, this sword community, and how supportive we've all been. And I know that for me personally, I would be handling this less well if it wasn't for all of you. And I hope that I can reciprocate in providing some solace in these times. So again, reach out to me. Zettel reading, topics, anything that's on your mind because you're either bored or feeling alone or just want some practice tips. Be safe, everyone, and I will look forward to seeing you all in person. But until then, until our next webinar.